Good morning. Welcome to the First Religious Society Unitarian Universalist in Newburyport, Massachusetts. My name is Joanna Fernandez, and I am delighted to be your worship associate this morning. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. We are glad that you are here. We come together at FRS online and in person, committed to love, peace, and justice. Our mission and invitation to all of you: come as you are, journey together in love, act with courage, transform our world. If you are worshiping online this morning and would like to access this morning's order of service, please click on the link just below the live stream. And I would like to now draw your attention to the many activities and events happening here at church listed in your order of service. We are excited to hold our annual Young Church Sunday at Atkinson Common again this year. This service will also be live streamed. So join us outside next week or online to celebrate the young people of our congregation. Also of note this morning, a team from FRS is participating in the Lewis D. Brown Walk for Peace in Boston. We are with them in spirit and honor their shared commitment to building peace in our region and around our world. Thank you. It is good to be together.
Good morning. Thank you for being with us this Mother's Day. Last Sunday was the first beautiful Sunday in May, and Reverend Rebecca told you that you got double points for being here on such a beautiful Sunday. And I say, since today is another beautiful Sunday in May and Mother's Day, you get triple points for being here today. Our topic this morning is self-compassion. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "The function of mildness is first to recognize suffering, and then to take care of suffering. The work of mindfulness is first to recognize the suffering, and second to embrace it. A mother taking care of a crying baby naturally will take the child into her arms without suppressing it, judging it, or ignoring the crying. Mindfulness is like that mother, recognizing and embracing suffering without judgment. We realize that Mother's Day can be a difficult day for many and a joyous day for others. There is room here for all of us. We all hold our beloved members and friends in our community in our hearts this day. You are joyfully called to worship." Thank you, choir. Please join us in saying our chalice words of lighting words as Natalie, Julia, and Tom G. light the chalice. The words can be found in your order of service.
We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Each week, we also light 2 candles of peace, representing 2 places on earth, and we remember it's a sacred encounter with our world. There are untold numbers of places on earth that need peace. These 2 we especially hold close in this service and through the week ahead. After each candle is lit, I will invite you to respond by saying, peace, soul, shalom. Our first candle is lit for the people of Sudan, where an ongoing conflict has left hundreds of people dead, thousands more wounded, and hundreds of thousands displaced. May peace be restored soon. To this we respond, peace, soul, shalom. Our second candle is lit for El Paso and Brownsville, Texas, where in anticipation of the end of Title 42, thousands of migrants have gathered. We hold these vulnerable people on the move, in our hearts. To this we respond, peace, soul, shalom. Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 396, Open My Heart. You are invited to allow this invitation to enter your body, mind, and spirit as we sing the hymn several times.
I gave Jane the wrong instructions. It's number 1013 in your teal hymnal.
Please remain standing as we join our voices in our affirmation of faith, followed by the doxology. The words can be found in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God. You may be seated.
So this is the time in our service. Time for all ages, so if the kids can please come up. Welcome. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I think I know all of you. Good morning. I am Joanna. I am Nash's mom, and this is my first time doing a time for all ages, so I'm pretty excited. Today I am going to be reading some lines to a book from you called The Golden Rule. And even if you've never read this book before, I'm going to guess you guys have all heard of The Golden Rule before, right? Yeah. So Nash is going to be my page turner. So in this book, it's a story of a little boy and his grandfather, and he's learning about the Golden Rule for the first time. And he's walking down a street in a city with his grandfather. And he sees a billboard, and it has big, bold lettering on it and a phrase, but he doesn't quite understand the language of the phrase, so he asks his grandfather to read it to him. And this is what it says. His grandfather tells him, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." People all over the world call those words the Golden Rule. Well, what does it mean? The boy wanted to know. And why is it golden? It means this: treat people the way you want to be treated. It's golden because it's so valuable and a way of living your life that it's so simple it shines. It's a very good rule. Well, who's it for? The boy asked. You, me, anyone can practice the Golden Rule. A rule that's the same for children and grown-ups. Same rule. There are not many rules like that. Very few. And it's for people everywhere? Everywhere. Whatever their religion, people find the idea of the Golden Rule in their holy books. Grandfather said. Christianity says you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. Judaism says what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow humans. Islam says hurt no one, so that no one may hurt you. Hinduism says this is the sum of duty, to do nothing to others which would cause them pain. Buddhism says do not do to others what would hurt you. The Shawnee tribe says do not kill or injure your neighbor, for it is not he or she that you injure, but yourself. So today's service in Big Church, as Jane has already mentioned, is all about self-compassion, which I know you guys have all talked about in Young Church because I was there the day that you read the book, Listening with My Heart, about the little girl who makes some mistakes in her school play and on the soccer field, and then she gets really, really upset with herself. But she also learns in that book about self-compassion and being a good friend to herself, right? So that's exactly what self-compassion is. Self-compassion is all about being a good friend to ourselves, even, especially, in fact, in moments where it feels particularly hard to do so, right? But we need to be a good friend to ourselves, just like we're good friends to other people. In fact, I think that's a big part of the Golden Rule that the grandfather left out, right? It's about treating ourselves the way we want people to treat us. So treating ourselves the way we want people to treat us. The idea is that we do not cause harm to others, and we do not cause harm to ourselves. One certainty in life is that we are all going to make mistakes. Every single one of us. Every single adult in this church, very much, including myself. Nash is looking at me, thinking yes. Makes mistakes. We're all going to make little mistakes, and we're all going to make big mistakes. And sometimes we don't even make mistakes. We just, our rules and things don't go quite as we expected them to. And all of that, that's just part of being human. And it can be really, really hard to accept. So think of some times when it wasn't quite easy to be nice to yourself. Maybe you were late to school because you overslept, or you didn't do as well in a test as you expected, or maybe you promised to do something and you didn't do it, or maybe you even said or did something unkind to someone else. When things like that happen, it's very easy for a very mean voice to get super loud in our heads and tell us how we messed up and how we could have done things better. And both in the moment when it's happening and even when we look back on it, right? Do you think that that voice is showing us self-compassion or being a good friend to us? No. No, that mean voice is not showing us self-compassion or being a good friend to us. So when that happens to me, which is not completely infrequently, I like to give that voice a silly name. And, something like banana, because it happens to rhyme with my name, Joanna. So that gives me a little distance from that mean voice in my head. And then I can say to it, banana, thank you for your message. I hear you. You are not being helpful. And then it's a lot easier for me to get out of that space of being so self-critical and so judgmental and be a better friend to myself. And then I can feel all of my feelings without all of the judgment and make amends if I need to, like saying sorry. Plus, it can be really, really hard to treat other people with kindness and love and patience and empathy if we are not showing the same to ourselves. For me, I know if I'm caught up in negative emotions like anger and frustration directed at myself, it's a lot easier for me to react to other people with anger and frustration too. Again, Nash is probably thinking, yes, that's true. Does that ever happen to you? Yeah. That's another reason why I think it's so important to include ourselves in the golden rule. So our being unkind to ourselves doesn't get in our way of being kind to others. So I'm going to read just a few more lines of this book, and then it's going to be time to head off to Young Church. But this time when I'm reading, think of the golden rule as including how you treat yourself too. The boy looked at his grandfather. Practicing the golden rule seems like it can be hard. I said it was simple. I didn't say it would be easy. Grandpa, the boy said, the golden rule is a very big thing, isn't it? Very big and very small and very old. It's been around thousands of years. Thousands of years? Well, I don't think everyone is practicing it the way they should. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many problems. You're right, my boy. I wonder how many things would change if everyone lived by the golden rule. I think people would be nicer, kinder. They'd act better towards their families and friends and even strangers. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Wonderful, Grandpa. But you can't make everyone in the world practice the golden rule. There is only one person you can ask to do that. Me? You. It begins with you. Please join us in singing our Children to Young Church, number 413, Go Now in Peace. The generosity of our community is an essential ministry that supports the work of our church, both in Newburyport and beyond. Each week, 50% of the Sunday offering not designated as a pledge goes to a local community partner engaged in important efforts to transform our region. The May shared collection goes to support Emmaus, Inc. Emmaus serves more than 2,000 unhoused women, men, and children from the Merrimack Valley and the North Shore every year. On any given night, roughly 300 people call Emmaus home. More than 80,000 meals are served yearly to shelter residents, and many housing and program participants receive emergency food from Emmaus Food Pantry. 91 cents of every dollar raised goes directly to Emmaus programs. In order to give online, please use the link in your order of service or below the live stream. You can also make a contribution by text, and of course, you can always mail a check to the church as well. Thank you. The offering will now be gratefully received.
Each week, we lift up the joys and sorrows of our beloved faith community. Stephen Wolf Foster, our pastoral care associate, will light the candles as I read what has been shared with me in advance of today's service. If you would like to share a joy or a sorrow to be read in the service, you can always send an email to betweenus@frsuu.org or write in the book located in the vestibule. Laura Evans Daly asked that we light a candle of concern for her pregnant granddaughter who is recovering from COVID, as well as her mother, father, and other grandmother who all have it. We light 2 candles of concern for Jean Newman. She shares that her friend Norma's husband George died this week. He was a very kind man with a great sense of humor. This comes after a somewhat recent loss 2 years ago of the family's oldest son, Michael. Please send kind thoughts and prayers to the young family during this sad time. We also hold in our hearts Jean's friend Lois, who has been in either the hospital or rehab in Florida since January for surgery with several complicated conditions. We send healing thoughts and prayers that she will be able to recover and get back home soon to New Jersey, and for support of her husband Rod and his caring for Lois. And finally, please hold in your hearts Reverend Rebecca. Her father is critically ill in his final days. She is with him in Connecticut. Please send her dearest love and hopes that his transition is smooth. Let us take a moment, and then we will have a Gaelic blessing from the choir.
This morning's reading is entitled St. Francis and the Sow. The bud stands for all things, even for those things that don't flower. For everything flowers from within, of self-blessing. Though sometimes it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to put a hand on its brow of the flower and retell it in words and in touch, it is lovely, until it flowers again from within of self-blessing. As St. Francis put his hand on the creased forehead of the sow and told her in words and in touch, blessings of earth on the sow. And the sow began remembering, all down her thick length, from the earthen snout, all the way through the fodder and slops, to the spiritual curl of the tail. From the hard spike spiked out from the spine, down through the great broken heart. To the sheer blue milken dreaminess, spurting and shuddering from the 14 teats into the 14 mouths, sucking and blowing beneath them. The long, perfect loveliness of sow.
Thank you, Joanna. I would like to begin this exploration of self-compassion by asking you 3 questions. The first is, who is your harshest critic? The second is, who is your best friend? And the third is, how can you make your harshest critic sound more like your best friend? I will repeat those. The first question is, who is your harshest critic? The second is, who is your best friend? And the third is, how can you make your harshest critic sound more like your best friend? I ask this question about who is your harshest critic because for me, the answer is clear. As Pogo said, I have met the enemy and it is me. That is not to say that I do not receive criticism from others, but on a day-to-day basis, by far, the majority of the critical messages that I receive are from myself. And frankly, some days I plumb wear myself out. If, like me, your harshest critic is yourself, I would like to share with you that I have come to believe that we can tamp down those harsh inner voices. And I would like to invite you to consider some ways to do that so that we might shift from a mindset of self-reproach to one of self-compassion. It is important that we do so for our own well-being and so that we might participate fully in this beloved community. Where do these harsh inner messages come from? I believe there are multiple sources at work. One is that we are simply hardwired, our brains are hardwired to focus more on negativity, on the negative than on the positive. This is especially true if we feel that we have made a mistake or we feel that we have failed at something that is important to us. Dr. Rick Hansen, the author of The Buddha's Brain, calls this focus our negativity bias. A second source of this negativity is from our own inner critic. The inner critic, which Joanna referred to as that mean voice, the inner critic is an inner voice through which we have internalized negative judgments or criticism from authority figures of our youth or from society at large. We have essentially made those critical inner voices and messages our own. Perhaps originally they might have come from a parent for whom you could never have been enough, or an older sibling or a grandparent, a teacher or a coach. These messages might have left us with feelings of that we are somehow not enough, or that we're feeling fraudulent, or somehow we're fundamentally unworthy. A third contributor to our inner critic is cultural conditioning. We are constantly bombarded by messages from our culture, messages that insist that we improve ourselves with emphasis on youth, material success, and consumerism. We are told overtly and covertly what we should look like, what we should own, how we should be spending our time and our money, and these messages do not bring real happiness. And cultural messages often intersect with gender conditioning. Boys and men are told to have a stiff upper lip and be stoic. The archetype of the strong man suffering alone in silence may be changing, but it has been around for hundreds of years. And such deep cultural conditioning changes very slowly. And women are deeply conditioned to put others first. We are taught to think about and act to meet the needs of others, children, spouses, family, community, before meeting our own needs. And when we do put our own needs first, we can feel that we are being somehow selfish. Given such powerful forces that feed our cycles of self-criticism, what can we do to make a shift towards self-compassion? My response may surprise you, but here it is. I suggest that we reverse the wisdom of the Golden Rule, a rule that is found in all the great religious traditions of the world. If we reversed it, or at least considered making it work in two directions, what would that be like? What would it be like? I still say to FRS members, yes, we should still say do unto others as we do unto ourselves. But what if we added to that, do unto ourselves as we do unto others? I will repeat that, do unto ourselves as we do unto others. For I watch members of this community reach out to others with compassion all the time, whether it is the pastoral care associates, or so many of you are helping our neighbors, our Afghan neighbors, or our social justice groups. We do this informally and consistently, day after day, reaching out to one another here and beyond these sanctuary walls. Do we extend to ourselves that same kind of compassion? If not, or maybe not as often as we could, let us consider some of the obstacles that make it feel difficult, perhaps even unthinkable, to expand the Golden Rule towards ourselves. I want to name 3 blocks this morning and offer some practices that we can use to overcome these blocks. The first, and most significant, is failing to acknowledge our own suffering. The second is the flight or freeze response. And the third is what I will call the second arrow. The greatest block to self-compassion is our reluctance to accept our own suffering and to recognize chronic self-criticism as a form of suffering. I was going to say that part again. The failure to recognize our own suffering and to recognize chronic self-criticism as a form of suffering. In her sermon last October, Reverend Rebecca pointed out that comparing our suffering to that of others is often not helpful. It is tempting to say, oh, my suffering is nothing. Think of the poor people in Ukraine. Such an attitude might make us temporarily feel better. It shifts us from feeling difficult emotions to feeling gratitude. But it prevents us from acknowledging the emotions that arose in the first place in response to a hard reality. Perhaps we don't consciously intend to do so, but we shut down these more difficult emotions when we engage in this kind of comparison. We cannot hold in compassion that which we do not acknowledge and accept. The energy of those emotions will not go away. Sometimes they will reappear in the form of depression or anxiety. Is there such a thing as too much positivity? I am a big fan of positive thinking, but I think we can overdo when we use what I think of as relentless positivity, as in the expression, it's all good, when something bad has just happened. Again, this response might feel good in the short term, but it leaves unrecognized and unattended to the more uncomfortable feelings, such as anger, frustration, sadness, and hurt, that naturally arise when bad things happen to good people. What is the alternative to denying our own suffering? Perhaps simply allowing ourselves to become more mindful of when we are suffering or struggling, and rather than minimize those feelings, try to create some space around them. Even naming them to ourselves lowers the emotional charge. Another block to self-compassion can be the flight or fight stress response. We can trigger a fight or flight response when we experience an attack of our own inner critic. Our nervous system does not distinguish between internal and external attacks. Either way, we go on the defense mode. And when we are in the defense mode, we are limited in our capacity to learn, to connect, or to be compassionate towards others as well as to ourselves. And as Joanna told the children this morning, when we are angry, blaming, or shaming ourselves, we can reactively deflect those feelings onto others. In diversity work, we used a Star Trek analogy to describe this mode. We called it all power to the shield. In other words, you can defend yourself, but you won't have energy or capacity to do much else. And it is exhausting. There is an alternative to fight or flight. It's a kind of innate nurturing care system, which Kristin Neff, the foremost researcher on self-compassion, called the mammalian care response, or the innate care response. As you know, when we go into fight or flight mode, part of our brain sends signals that increase blood pressure, adrenaline, and the hormone cortisol, all of which are useful when countering an external threat. Although evolution designed this response system to protect us from physical attack, they also can be activated just as easily by emotional attacks, whether they come from others or from ourselves. And over time, its effect can be to increase cortisol levels that lead to depression. Kristin Neff offers an alternative to fight or flight, one by which we can intentionally switch gears once we recognize that we are under an inner critic attack. She suggests that we tap into our innate care system. This is the response you see in animals when they're taking care of their young. This response produces a very different kind of physiological and emotional response than fight or flight. Rather, it activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which actually soothes our nerves and helps us to become calmer. This system also works to increase feelings of trust, safety, and connectedness. Kristin Neff wrote a 4-line mantra, which we can use to intentionally switch into this gear. And the words to this mantra are written in your order of service. They are, this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life. May I hold this with kindness. May I give myself the kindness that I deserve. It is helpful to hold your hand over your heart when you say this. That helps produce that parasympathetic, tap into that parasympathetic nervous system. Why does this work? This mantra helps us, first of all, acknowledge our own suffering, a critical first step, and it counters isolation. When we blame or shame ourselves, we tend to isolate, which increases our suffering. But the reality is we are not alone. We are all in this together. Another block to self-compassion is called the second arrow. American Buddhist teacher Tara Brach, in her book Radical Acceptance, writes that the Buddha once asked a student, if a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful? And the student replied, it is. And then the Buddha asked, if the person is struck by a second arrow, is that even more painful? And the student replied again, it is. The Buddha then explained, in life, we cannot always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. And with this second arrow comes the possibility of choice. The spiritual teacher, Pema Chodron, told a story that I think illustrates this point very well. She was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at a conference on mindfulness. The same weekend, she had volunteered to babysit for her 10-year-old granddaughter. The granddaughter took it upon herself to provoke her grandmother. She tried to provoke her not once, not twice, but multiple times. And finally, Pema lost it, and she yelled at the top of her lungs in anger at this 10-year-old. Then she was flooded with shame. Then she tried to bribe her granddaughter not to tell anybody. Then she went into a conference, and she told everybody at the conference what she had just done. First arrow, the anger. Second arrow, her response to that anger. But then she broke the cycle of shame and isolation when she went into the conference and told everybody. Emotional intelligence theory teaches us that all emotions are gifts. Those emotions that are difficult for us to experience, fear, anxiety, guilt, shame, frustration, they also bring gifts. Our emotions are universal. They exist in every culture, and they are pointing us to what is important, to our needs, both our met needs. When our needs are met, we have the happy emotions, and our unmet needs, which is when we experience the more difficult emotions. For example, the gift of anger can bring us clarity, help us to set boundaries, and motivate us to take action. And gender conditioning plays a role here. Many women have been conditioned not to express anger. We push the anger away by judging it as being bad, by disassociating from physical experience of anger, and we redirect attention and conversation. Many men have been conditioned not to express sadness. The last practice that I will mention this morning is called Beloved Other. I love this because it's such a simple practice. It is the practice of responding to yourself when a bad thing happens or when you make a mistake, as you would respond to somebody you deeply love. When someone you deeply love comes to you and says something like, "Oh, you won't believe what happened, I really blew it this time," how do you respond? You listen to them, you treat them with care and tenderness, you pay attention to the emotions that are present, and you respond by holding these feelings tenderly. Who are your beloveds? Who comes to you with problems? How do you talk to them when they come to you? Next time you make a mistake, would you try talking to yourself with that kind inner voice? So the next time, in conclusion, let me say, the next time you beat yourself up, you find yourself beating yourself up, please try to recognize the moment as one of suffering. Switch channels and try the self-compassion 4-line mantra, the words of which are printed in your order of service, or try the Beloved Other technique, speaking to yourself in the same kind tone of voice that you would a beloved other. Like developing any new habit, it takes practice, it takes repetition. You might not get it right away, but what is important is your intention to hold yourself with compassion. May it be so, and may we make it so. Amen. Please rise now in body or spirit and join in singing our closing hymn, number 1053, How Could Anyone? Please remain standing and join in saying our unison benediction as Joanna extinguishes the chalice. The words can be found in your order of service. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. As Galway Kinnell said in St. Francis and the Sow, everything flowers from within of self-blessing, though sometimes it is necessary to remind a thing of its loveliness. As you leave the sanctuary today, please do so with the intention of blessing yourself and holding yourself in compassion. And I am reminding you of your loveliness. Go now in peace and return with great joy.